A billionaire found a homeless boy sleeping in his car and took him home. Upon returning from work, he was moved to tears when he saw what the boy had done for his disabled wife. Rain lashed relentlessly against the city, turning streets into somber rivers. John Miller, 55, gripped the steering wheel of his Bentley Continental GT, his knuckles white with tension. The billionaire hospital magnate longed for the comfort of home. City lights shimmered in the reflecting puddles, creating a hypnotic ballet that nearly caused John to miss the turn into his company's underground parking garage. He frowned, fighting back fatigue. Another day, another late night. The echo of tires on wet concrete was the only sound in that subterranean world of steel and shadow. John parked in his reserved spot, the engine purring softly before falling silent. That's when he noticed something amiss. A subtle movement, almost imperceptible, in the back seat of his other car, a Rolls-Royce Ghost he rarely used. His heart quickened. A thief. Here sat his own company. He approached cautiously, Italian loafers echoing in the oppressive silence. As he drew closer, his eyes widened in shock. Huddled in the back seat, like a wounded animal, was a boy. No older than 12, John guessed. Worn clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, stained by rain and time. But it was the boy's eyes that captivated John. Large, dark, filled with fear and distrust. The boy stared back as if John were a predator about to strike. "My God," John murmured, his voice strangely loud in the empty space. John's first instinct was to reach for his phone, call security, the authorities, standard procedure, the logical course of action. But something stayed his hand. Perhaps it was the visible tremor in the boy's body, the way he cowered, as if wanting to disappear into the leather upholstery. A sudden, vivid flashback flooded John's mind. Himself, a child, in his opulent mansion, expensive toys, designer clothes, but a crushing loneliness that no luxury could fill. The contrast with this boy was stark, and yet there was something terribly familiar in those frightened eyes. "What's your name?" John asked, his voice softer than he intended. Silence. The boy just stared, like a deer caught in headlights. "I won't hurt you," John tried again, slowly extending a hand. The boy flinched further back. The seconds stretched, heavy as lead. John could hear the ticking of his wristwatch, each second an eternity of indecision. Calling the authorities would be right, safe. But why the hesitation? He looked at the boy again. Beneath the grime and fear, he saw a fragility that cracked his hardened heart. In that moment, John Miller, the ruthless business tycoon, did something that surprised even himself. "Come," he said, opening the car door. "I'll take you home." With trembling hands, John reached for his phone. "James, prepare the guest room. I'm bringing a guest." The voice on the other end sounded confused, concerned. John hung up before he could change his mind. During the drive to his estate, John watched the boy in the rearview mirror. He remained motionless, eyes fixed on the window, watching the affluent city pass by like a distant dream. John felt a lump in his throat. What was he doing? This was madness. Reckless. It was... The boy's eyes met his in the mirror. For a fleeting moment, John saw a flicker of something other than fear. Hope, perhaps. As the gates of the Miller estate swung open before them, John knew his life was about to change forever. What he didn't know was how profoundly. The Bentley glided to a stop at the mansion's entrance. John turned off the engine but didn't move to exit the car. He turned to face the boy, who now seemed even smaller, huddled against the door. "Michael," the boy said suddenly, his voice barely a whisper. John blinked, surprised. "What?" "My name," the boy continued, his eyes meeting John's for the first time. "It's Michael." An involuntary smile touched John's lips. It was a start. Just then, the mansion door opened, revealing James, the butler, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Beside him, a figure in a wheelchair moved forward. Emily Miller, John's wife, emerged from the shadows of the doorway. Her eyes widened at the sight of the dirty, frightened boy in her husband's car. John took a deep breath, bracing himself for what was to come. He knew bringing Michael home was only the first step on a journey that promised to be tumultuous. As he helped Michael out of the car, John couldn't help but notice Emily's gaze, a blend of surprise, apprehension, and something else. Curiosity. He knew his wife well enough to know that tonight marked the beginning of a profound shift in their lives. Michael, in turn, stared at the imposing mansion with a mixture of awe and fear. His eyes darted from one detail to another, as if trying to memorize every inch of this new world he had fallen into. John placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, guiding him towards the entrance. Each step felt weighted with significance, as if fate itself were watching, waiting to see what would unfold. "Welcome to your new home, Michael," John said softly, as they crossed the threshold. What none of them knew at that moment was that this rainy night, this unlikely encounter, would be the catalyst for a transformation that would affect not only their lives, but the lives of many others. The story of John Doe's Emily and Michael was just beginning, and it promised the Miller mansion stood majestically against the night sky, its sleek, modern lines contrasting with the meticulously manicured gardens that surrounded it. Michael, still trembling from cold and fear, couldn't help but gasp as he took in the monumental structure before him. His wide, frightened eyes scanned the mansion's facade, the numerous windows glittering like jewels in the night. John gently guided the boy along the gravel path, observing Michael's reactions with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Each step seemed hesitant, as if the boy feared the ground might disappear beneath his bare feet at any moment. At the entrance, James waited, his stiff, formal posture contrasting with the uneasy expression on his wrinkled face. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Michael, a flicker of surprise and concern crossing his features before his professional mask slipped back into place. "Welcome to Miller Manor, young sir," James said, his voice betraying a slight tremor. Before John could respond, the soft whir of wheels on marble drew his attention. Emily Miller emerged from the shadows of the entrance hall, her wheelchair gliding silently across the polished floor. At 48, Emily was still a woman of striking beauty. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, framing a face that could have been sculpted by a Renaissance artist. But it was her eyes that captured one's attention, blue as sapphires, yet dulled, lacking the sparkle John once knew. Upon seeing Michael, Emily's eyes narrowed, a mixture of surprise and disapproval coloring her delicate features. "John," she said, her voice as cold as ice, "what is the meaning of this?" The air around them suddenly thickened, charged with tension. Michael instinctively shrunk back, moving closer to John. "Emily," John began, his voice betraying an unusual nervousness. "This is Michael. He needed a place to stay tonight." Emily raised a perfectly arched eyebrow, her lips pressing into a thin line. "And since when did our home become a shelter?" The coldness in her voice was palpable, making Michael shiver visibly. John opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by James, who tactfully intervened. "Madam, monsieur, if you'll permit me, I'll show young Michael to his room." John nodded, grateful for the interruption. Michael cast one last frightened glance at Emily before following James up the grand staircase. The guest room, despite being hastily prepared, was a testament to luxury and opulence. A king-size bed dominated the space, covered in Egyptian cotton sheets and a silk duvet. Heavy drapes framed floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the illuminated gardens. Michael stared at all of this with wide eyes, clearly out of place in this environment of ostentatious wealth. His dirty, torn clothes seemed even more pitiful against the backdrop of the room's luxurious furnishings. "There are clean clothes in the bathroom, young sir," James said, his voice gentler now. "Go, and if you need anything, just ring." With that, the butler retreated, leaving Michael alone in a world that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Meanwhile, downstairs, the tension between John and Emily reached its peak. "What were you thinking, John?" Emily hissed, her voice low but charged with emotion, bringing a street urchin into our home. "Have you lost your mind?" John ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture of frustration. "I couldn't just leave him there, Emily. He was alone, scared." "And since when is that our problem?" Emily interrupted, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and something else. "Fear, perhaps. We can barely take care of ourselves. John, look at us. This house, it's a mausoleum. We're dying here day by day." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, revealing the depth of her pain. John moved closer, kneeling beside Emily's chair. "I know, my love, I know it's been hard. But maybe this is what we need. A chance to do some good, to bring some life back into this house." Emily closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I don't know if I have the strength for this, John. I don't know if I can open my heart again, only to have it broken." John took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll do it together, Emily. One day at a time." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of unspoken pain, of shattered dreams and buried hopes, but also, perhaps, with a tiny spark of possibility. Upstairs, Michael lay on the enormous bed, his eyes fixed on the ornate ceiling. The Miller mansion might be a dream home for many, but tonight, for its 3 occupants, it was a house of unspoken silences, of broken hearts seeking solace, and of uncertain futures waiting to be written. As the night wore on, each of them, John, Emily, and Michael, lay awake, lost in their own thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. Michael's unexpected arrival had disrupted the fragile equilibrium of the mansion, and now the pieces were in motion. What would happen next was a mystery. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again in the House of Silence. Michael awoke with a start, his heart pounding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, he lay paralyzed, the luxurious room with its elegant furnishings and silk drapes feeling like a dream. But it wasn't a dream, he reminded himself. It was real. He was in the Miller mansion. He sat up in the king-size bed, the soft sheets, a strange sensation against his skin after so long sleeping on hard as cold surfaces. The silence of the mansion was oppressive, almost tangible. Then he heard something. Voices, distant, but clear enough to discern the tension in them. "We can't just keep him here, John." The female voice, which Michael recognized as Emily's, sounded exasperated. "What will people say? What will happen to our reputation?" "Damn the reputation, Emily." John's reply was swift and sharp. "We're talking about a child who needs help." Michael cringed, guilt washing over him for being the cause of their argument. He slipped silently out of bed, his bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. He moved towards the door, hesitant, curious to explore this new world he had fallen into. In the hallway, the voices became more distant, just unintelligible murmurs now. Michael ventured further, his eyes scanning the walls adorned with expensive artwork and precious antiques. Each step echoed softly on the polished wooden floors, making him feel like an intruder in a museum after closing time. As he wandered through the silent corridors, Michael couldn't help but notice the absence of human warmth. There were no family photos on the walls, no signs of laughter or happy moments shared. The mansion, despite all its opulence, felt empty, lifeless. At the end of one dimly lit hallway, a partially open door caught his eye. Peeking inside, Michael saw a room that seemed frozen in time. It was a music room, dominated by a magnificent grand piano. Yellowed sheet music lay scattered across the instrument, as if someone had interrupted a practice session and never returned. Drawn by an unseen force, Michael entered the room, his gaze fixed on the piano. His fingers brushed lightly against the keys, not daring to press them, just feeling the cool, smooth texture of the ivory. Then he noticed the framed photographs on top of the piano. They were pictures of Emily, but a very different Emily from the woman he had met the night before. In these photos, she was standing radiant, holding a bouquet of flowers on a brightly lit stage. In another, she was seated at the piano, her fingers a blur of motion across the keys, her face illuminated by a passion that seemed to have long since extinguished. "She was magnificent," a soft voice said behind him, making Michael jump. John stood in the doorway, a sad smile playing on his lips. He entered the room, his eyes scanning the photographs with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. Emily was one of the most talented pianists of her generation, John continued, his voice low, as if sharing a precious secret. Audiences around the world were captivated by her music. That's how we met, you know. I was in the front row at one of her concerts in Paris. It was love at first sight, or rather, at first sound. Michael listened, mesmerized, as John recounted a love story worthy of a fairy tale, the billionaire and the famous pianist, united by music and destiny. But then John's expression darkened. "Everything changed one night," he said, his voice now a husky whisper. As we were driving back from a concert, the rain was heavy, the roads were slick. John paused, swallowing hard. Michael could see the pain in his eyes, the memories still raw even after all these years. "The car crashed," John finally continued. "When I woke up in the hospital, I learned that Emily would never walk again. And with her legs, her music went too, her joy, her will to live." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with grief and regret. Michael felt a wave of compassion for this broken couple, living in a mansion that felt more like a mausoleum of lost dreams. Outside, the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. The morning light filtered through the windows, illuminating the music room as if trying to breathe life back into this place, forgotten by time. Upstairs, Emily sat in her wheelchair by the window in her room. Her eyes, once full of life and passion, now observed the world with a mixture of melancholy and resignation. Then she saw it. Michael had ventured out into the garden, his bare feet leaving footprints in the dewy grass. The boy seemed enchanted by the flowers, touching them gently as if afraid they might crumble beneath his fingers. Something stirred within Emily, a pang of, what? Compassion? Recognition? For a moment, she saw herself reflected in that boy. Young, full of life, discovering a new and wondrous world. But then, fear gripped her. Fear of attachment, of caring again, only to have her heart broken once more. Emily closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. When she opened them again, her expression had hardened. She couldn't afford to care. It was safer to remain in the silence, in the emptiness that had become her refuge. But as she watched Michael exploring the garden, a small part of her, a part she had long thought dead, began to awaken. It was a faint sensation, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a spark of hope. In the Miller mansion, where silence had reigned for so long, the echoes of the past were beginning to mingle with the hesitant sounds of a possible future. What would happen next, no one could predict. But one thing was certain. Michael's arrival had stirred the still waters of this house, and the ripples of change were only just beginning to form. The morning progressed slowly at the Miller mansion, the silence broken only by the occasional clink of silverware as James prepared breakfast. Michael, restless and curious, wandered the endless hallways of the house, his bare feet leaving soft imprints on the Persian rugs. That's when he saw it, a slightly ajar door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. Something about it drew him in, as if an invisible thread were pulling him forward. He pushed it gently and the door creaked open, revealing a long-forgotten room. Sunlight filtered through dusty curtains, dancing in the air thick with motes. Furniture draped in white sheets resembled silent ghosts, mute witnesses to a bygone era. But in the center of the room, majestic and imposing even beneath a layer of dust, stood a grand piano. Michael approached slowly, his heart quickening with each step. With trembling hands, he gripped the edge of the cloth covering the instrument. He hesitated for a moment, as if about to unveil a great secret. Then, in one swift motion, he pulled the fabric away. The piano emerged in all its glory. The black ebony gleamed softly in the diffused light, the ivory keys beckoning. Michael ran his fingers lightly over them, feeling their cool, smooth texture. A sudden flashback hit him, his mother, sitting beside him at a battered old upright piano, guiding his small hands over the keys. "Like this, my love," she would say, her voice soft and melodious. "Feel the music within you." Driven by the memory, Michael pressed a key. The sound, pure and crystalline, echoed through the room. Then another, and another. His hands began to move almost of their own accord, picking out a simple melody his mother had taught him so long ago. The music flowed from him, filling the empty spaces of the mansion, seeping into every nook and cranny. It was as if the house itself were awakening from a long slumber. Upstairs, Emily froze. The teacup she held trembled in her hand, spilling a few drops onto the blanket draped over her lap. That sound. After so long, music was once again echoing through the walls of the Miller mansion. A wave of emotions washed over her: surprise, nostalgia, and something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A flicker of excitement, a spark of life. Almost unconsciously, her hands gripped the wheels of her chair, propelling her towards the door. The hallway seemed endless as Emily made her way, guided by the melody. Each note pulled her back in time, to brightly lit stages, to ecstatic audiences, to the passion that had once defined her existence. Meanwhile, John Miller was returning to the mansion earlier than usual. Something had been bothering him all day, a restlessness he couldn't name. As he entered, however, he immediately sensed that something was different. The air felt lighter, as if a window had been opened after years of being shut tight. Following the sound, John arrived at the door to the music room. There, standing in the entrance, was Emily. His wife, who for years had barely left her room, was there, watching something inside the room with an expression he hadn't seen in a long time. John approached silently, following Emily's gaze. Inside, seated at the piano, was Michael. The boy played with his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. His small, dirty hands contrasted sharply with the pristine keys, but the melody he produced was pure and true. Emily leaned forward slightly in her chair, as if drawn in by the music. John noticed a subtle shift in her expression. Her eyes, once dull, now glimmered with something that might be interest, nostalgia, hope. Suddenly, Michael opened his eyes. Seeing Emily and John in the doorway, his hands froze on the keys. The last chord echoed through the room, leaving a silence charged with expectation. The boy looked like a startled animal, ready to flee at the slightest movement. His eyes darted from Emily to John and back again, waiting for a reaction. Emily remained motionless, her face an impassive mask. But John could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between the desire to withdraw back into herself and the urge to reconnect with the music that had once been her life. The moment stretched, taut as a violin string about to snap. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped, freezing this scene in a bubble of possibilities. It was Emily who finally broke the silence. Her voice, raspy from disuse, sounded strange even to her own ears. Where did you learn to play like that?" Michael swallowed hard, his hands still hovering over the keys. "My mother," he replied softly. "She taught me before—" His voice trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. But it wasn't necessary. The weight of loss was evident in his young eyes. Emily nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. For a moment, she seemed to want to say something more, but then she closed her lips, drawing back slightly. John stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "That was very beautiful, Michael," he said, his voice soft. Perhaps you could play more for us sometime?" Michael looked at Emily as if seeking her approval. The woman remained silent for a long moment before giving a curt nod. "Perhaps," she murmured, almost to herself. Then, without another word, she turned her chair and wheeled away down the hallway. John and Michael stood there, watching her go. But something had shifted. A door that had been closed for so long had been cracked open, and through that crack a sliver of hope was filtering into the Miller mansion. Music had returned to the house of silence, and with it, the promise that maybe, just maybe, healing could find its way back too. The days that followed the discovery of the piano were marked by a palpable tension in the Miller mansion. Emily vacillated between the urge to isolate herself completely and an almost uncontrollable desire to return to the music room. Each note that Michael played was like a siren's call, awakening memories long buried. One afternoon, as the soft strains of the piano floated through the hallways, Emily found herself transported back in time. Suddenly, she was once again on the stage of the Royal Albert Hall, the lights blinding, the roar of the crowd deafening. Her hands moved confidently and passionately across the keys, the music flowing from her like an extension of her very soul. The thunderous applause, the flowers thrown onto the stage. That had been her last performance before the accident that changed everything. The sound of a discordant note brought her back to the present. Without realizing it, Emily had wheeled herself to the door of the music room. Michael was there, concentrating intently, his small hands doing their best to reach the correct notes. Seized by an impulse she couldn't explain, Emily entered the room. The squeak of her wheels made Michael jump, his eyes wide with surprise and a touch of fear. "You're playing it wrong," Emily said, her voice sharper than she intended. Michael swallowed hard. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb." "It's not that," Emily interrupted, moving closer to the piano. "Your posture is wrong. You'll never reach the notes correctly like that." Hesitantly, she reached out, gently adjusting Michael's shoulders. "Like this. Keep your back straight, your shoulders relaxed." Michael nodded, looking at Emily with a mixture of awe and caution. "My mum used to tell me that," he murmured. The mention of Michael's mother piqued Emily's curiosity. "Your mother—" "She played?" A sad smile lit up the boy's face. "Yeah, she loved it. She wasn't a professional like you, but she played in bars and restaurants sometimes. She said music was magic, that it could mend broken hearts." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. How many times had she herself said something similar? Before she could stop herself, she was correcting the position of Michael's fingers, showing him how to reach the more difficult notes. Meanwhile, in his study, John was making discreet inquiries. The mystery of Michael's past consumed him, and he was determined to learn more. After days of investigation, he finally had some answers. "Helen Soares," John murmured, staring at the notes on his desk. "Amateur pianist, incredibly talented, died in a car accident 6 months ago." The irony wasn't lost on him, another life cut short by an accident, just like Emily's career. But while Emily had survived physically, it was as if her passion for music had died that rainy night. Days turned into weeks, and Michael's presence in the music room became a constant. The melodies that were once hesitant grew in confidence, filling the empty halls of the mansion with life. The staff were the first to notice the change. James, the butler, observed with growing surprise how Emily was spending more time out of her room. Mrs. Beatrice, the housekeeper, swore she'd seen a hint of a smile on her employer's lips. The atmosphere of the house, once heavy and oppressive, was beginning to transform. It was as if the music was slowly melting the ice that had accumulated over the years. One morning, after watching Michael struggle with a particularly difficult piece, Emily finally succumbed to the impulse she had been resisting for days. "Do you want me to teach you properly?" The words came out before she could stop them. Michael froze, his eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and hope. You would do that?" Emily nodded slowly, a part of her already regretting the offer, while another part, a part she thought had long since died, stirred with anticipation. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice firm. "We'll start tomorrow." That night, Emily barely slept. Memories of her own piano lessons, of endless hours practicing scales and arpeggios, mingled with images of little Michael sitting at the piano. Part of her dreaded reliving those moments, fearing the pain that would surely come. But another part, a part that was growing stronger with each passing day, yearned for it. John watched it all with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He saw Emily's internal struggle, the fear of opening herself up again competing with the desire to reconnect with the music. And he saw Michael, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and nervousness every time Emily approached the piano. The next morning, when Emily entered the music room, Michael was already there, sitting upright on the piano bench, his small hands resting expectantly on the keys. "We'll start with scales," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly, "the foundation of all good technique." As she guided Michael through the basic exercises, Emily felt something awakening within her. It was as if each note played by the boy was slowly breaking the chains that bound her to the past. Michael, in turn, drank in every word from Emily. His eyes shone with determination as he repeated the exercises, eager to impress his new mentor. From his study, John heard the hesitant notes transform into more confident melodies. A smile touched his lips. Perhaps, just perhaps, music could be the key to healing not just Emily, but the entire Miller family. As the lesson progressed, the initial tension began to dissipate. Emily found herself correcting Michael's posture almost automatically, her hands guiding his with a gentleness that surprised them both. "You have a natural talent," Emily admitted reluctantly at the end of the lesson. "Your mother, she taught you well." Michael beamed, a genuine smile that lit up the entire room. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I would love to keep learning from you." Emily hesitated for a moment, fear and anticipation warring within her. Finally, she nodded. "Tomorrow, same time," she said, her voice softer than it had been in years. As Emily left the room, she realized that, for the first time in a long time, she was looking forward to the next day. Music, which for so long had been a source of pain, was slowly beginning to become a source of joy, healing. She couldn't quite name it yet, but she knew something was changing. And so, day by day, note by note, the Miller mansion began to awaken from its long winter, warmed by the melody of a piano and the unexpected sound of laughter. Morning arrived at the Miller mansion with a different atmosphere. The air felt lighter, charged with expectation. Emily awoke early, something that hadn't happened in years. Her hands trembled slightly as James helped her get ready, a nervousness she hadn't felt since her concert days. When she entered the music room, Michael was already there, his fingers gliding smoothly over the piano keys, practicing the scales Emily had taught him the day before. He stopped abruptly upon seeing her, a shy smile illuminating his face. Emily positioned her wheelchair beside the piano, adjusting herself so she could observe Michael's hands. "Let's start with some warm-up exercises," she said, her voice softer than usual. As she guided Michael through the basic techniques, Emily was transported back to her own childhood. She remembered herself, a golden-haired girl seated at the piano, her small hands stretching to reach the keys under the watchful eye of her teacher. The frustration of missed notes, the joy of finally mastering a difficult piece, it all came back in a rush of emotions. No, Emily interrupted her thoughts, gently correcting the position of Michael's fingers. "Keep your wrists elevated, as if you're holding an orange." Michael immediately adjusted his posture, his eyes fixed on Emily's hands, absorbing every detail of her instructions. The ease with which the boy grasped the teachings impressed Emily. There was a natural fluidity in his movements, a connection with the instrument that reminded her of her own younger self. "You have a gift, Michael," she admitted, surprised by the sincerity in her own voice. "Your mother must have been an excellent teacher." Michael's eyes shone with the praise, a wide smile illuminating his face. "She would have loved to hear you say that, Mrs. Miller. She always said that music was the language of the soul." The words struck a chord within Emily. How many times had she herself said something similar? Music was indeed the language of her soul, a language she had silenced for far too long. From outside the room, John watched the scene silently. He had cancelled an important meeting to be there, drawn by the sounds emanating from the music room. What he saw took his breath away. Emily, his Emily, was leaning over the piano, her eyes shining with an intensity he hadn't seen in years. There was life in her face, an animation that had long been absent. But along with the joy, John felt a pang of worry. What if Emily grew too attached to Michael? What if the boy left? Could his wife bear another loss? Inside the room, oblivious to John's presence, Emily and Michael continued their lesson. The hours passed quickly, filled with scales, arpeggios, and short melodies. The occasional frustration was quickly replaced by determination, both on the part of the student and the teacher. "I think we've practiced enough for today," Emily finally said, noticing the tiredness in Michael's eyes. "But before we finish, how about we try something different?" Without waiting for a response, Emily positioned her hands over the keys. For a moment, she hesitated, fear threatening to overwhelm her. But then, with a deep breath, she began to play. It was a simple melody, a lullaby her own mother used to play. The notes flowed from her fingers with a surprising ease. It was like reuniting with an old friend, familiar and comforting. Michael watched, mesmerized, as Emily's fingers danced over the keys. Then, without thinking, he began to accompany her. His small hands naturally found the complementary notes, creating a harmony that filled the room. Emily looked at Michael, surprised. The boy was playing by ear, instinctively following the melody she was creating. There was a synchronicity between them, a connection that went beyond the notes on the page. As the music swelled, Emily felt something awaken within her. It was as if a dormant part of her soul was finally stirring. Her hands moved with more confidence, the melody becoming more complex. Michael followed her every step, his eyes shining with pure joy. John, still watching from the doorway, felt tears prick his eyes. The scene before him was almost painfully beautiful. Emily and Michael, so different in age and experience, united by music. There was a harmony between them that transcended the notes. It was as if their souls were conversing through the piano. The music reached its climax, the notes intertwining in a complex and beautiful dance. And then softly it came to an end. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Emily looked down at her hands, still resting on the keys. She was trembling, but not with fear or sadness. It was a different emotion, one she hadn't felt in a long time. Joy, pure, simple joy. "That was amazing," Michael whispered, his eyes wide with admiration. "I never thought I could play like that." Emily turned to him, a genuine smile illuminating her face. "You have an extraordinary talent, Michael. With practice and dedication, you can go far." Michael grinned back, a wide, brilliant smile that lit up the entire room. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, he felt truly accepted, valued. John chose that moment to enter the room, clapping softly. "That was wonderful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You two, together, it's something special." Emily looked at her husband, noticing the tears in his eyes. She reached out, taking his hand. "Yes, it is special," she agreed softly. In that moment, something shifted in the Miller mansion. The silence that had reigned for so long was broken, not just by music but by the sound of laughter and animated conversation. Dinner that night was the most cheerful it had been in years, with Michael sharing stories of his mother and Emily recounting memories of her concert days. Later, when everyone had retired for the night, Emily sat alone in her room, replaying the events of the day. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had lain idle for so long. Today, they had made music again. Today, she had felt alive again. With a sigh, Emily realized that something had changed within her. The fear was still there, the pain of loss still real, but now there was something more, a spark of hope, a desire to live that she thought she had lost forever. As sleep finally claimed her, Emily smiled. Tomorrow would be another day, another lesson, another chance to make music. And for the first time in years, she looked forward to the dawn. Breakfast at the Miller mansion had become a time of unexpected joy in recent weeks. The table, once silent and tense, was now filled with the clinking of silverware and animated conversation. It was in this setting that John, with a heavy sigh, made his announcement. "I need to travel for business for a few days," he said, his eyes flitting between Emily and Michael. Worry was evident in his voice, the lines on his forehead deepening. Emily, surprisingly, was the first to respond. "We'll be fine, John," she said, her voice firmer than it had been in years. "Don't worry," John blinked, clearly taken aback by his wife's response. He was used to a withdrawn, dependent Emily. This new version of her, more confident and assertive, was something he was still adjusting to. "Are you sure?" he asked, unable to hide his concern. "I can postpone the trip if—" "Don't be silly," Emily interrupted gently. "Your business is important. Besides," she added with a small smile, "Michael and I have a lot of practicing to do." Michael, who had remained silent until then, nodded enthusiastically. "I promise to behave, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice full of sincerity. John looked at the two of them, a mixture of pride and apprehension swirling within him. In just a few weeks, Michael had brought more life into the mansion than it had seen in years, and Emily, well, she seemed to be blossoming again, like a long-dormant flower finally finding the sun. On the morning of John's departure, The farewell was more emotional than any of them expected. John hugged Michael tightly, whispering words of encouragement. When he turned to Emily, he hesitated for a moment before leaning down and kissing her softly. "Take care," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You too," she replied softly. Before getting into the car, John pulled James aside, giving him detailed instructions. Any problem at all, call me immediately," he insisted. James nodded solemnly. "Don't worry, sir. I'll take care of everything." As the car pulled away, John cast one last look back at the mansion. Through the window of the music room, he could see Emily and Michael already positioned at the piano, their heads bent close together as they poured over the sheet music. The sight warmed his heart, but also tightened it with a pang of jealousy, fear. He wasn't sure. With John gone, Emily and Michael quickly settled into a routine centered around music. Mornings were dedicated to technical exercises, scales and arpeggios. Afternoons were for exploring new pieces, with Emily patiently guiding Michael through increasingly complex compositions. The mansion, once a place of oppressive silence, now vibrated with life. The sound of the piano echoed through the halls, often accompanied by occasional laughter, a sound long absent from these walls. During breaks between practice sessions, Emily began to share stories of her concert days. Her eyes would sparkle as she described the grand concert halls of Europe. The nervous anticipation before each performance, the adrenaline rush of being on stage in front of an ecstatic audience. Music has the power to transport not only the listener, but also the performer, she explained to Michael. "When I played, it was as if the world disappeared. There was only me and the piano." Michael listened, fascinated, absorbing every word. In return, he shared memories of his mother playing in small bars and restaurants. "She didn't have a piano at home," he told Emily, "so sometimes she'd take me to the bars before they opened. We'd stay there for hours, her playing and teaching me. She said music was our way of traveling, even when we couldn't go anywhere." Emily felt her heart clench at the boy's words. She recognized in him the same passion for music that had once consumed her, but where she had allowed that passion to fade after the accident, Michael kept it alive, even in the face of adversity. As the days passed, Emily and Michael developed an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. Through music, they communicated on a deeper level. Emily could sense when Michael was tired or frustrated just by the way he played. Michael, in turn, learned to read Emily's moods through her musical choices. John's absence, though felt, allowed Emily and Michael to grow closer without the added pressure of external expectations. Emily was surprised to find that not only did she not feel burdened by caring for Michael, but that his presence was a comfort, a constant reminder of the beauty and joy that music could bring. One evening, after a particularly productive day, Emily found Michael staring pensively out the window of the music room. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Michael turned, a small smile playing on his lips. "I was thinking about how music can bring people together," he said. "My mom used to say that music was a universal language. I think I understand what she meant now." Emily felt her eyes well up with tears. "Your mother was a wise woman," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. In that moment, Emily realized that something fundamental had shifted within her. Music, which for so long had been a source of pain and regret, was once again becoming a source of joy and connection. And it was all thanks to a little boy who had entered her life so unexpectedly. As they returned to the piano for another practice session, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would not allow fear to hold her back from embracing this second chance. Music had returned to her life, and this time she would hold on to it with all her might. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the music room, casting dancing shadows on the polished wooden floor. Michael, ever curious, was exploring the less visited corners of the room while Emily took a tea break. That's when his eyes landed on a dusty box, half hidden behind a bookshelf. "Mrs. Miller," he called out, his voice tinged with excitement. "What's this?" Emily turned her wheelchair, frowning as she saw the object in Michael's hands. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the box. It contained her old sheet music, compositions she hadn't seen in years. Those are my old songs, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Michael carefully opened the box, his eyes widening as he saw the yellowed pages covered in meticulously handwritten notes. One score in particular caught his attention. It was thicker than the others, with an elegant title at the top, Symphony of the Stars. "Can we play this one?" Michael asked, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Emily hesitated. That composition was her unfinished masterpiece, the piece she had been working on when the accident happened. It was complex, challenging, laden with emotions she had buried deep within herself. "I don't know, Michael," she began, but something in the boy's hopeful gaze made her stop. "Well, perhaps we can try." Michael's face lit up with a radiant smile. He hurried to the piano, carefully placing the sheet music on the stand. In the days that followed, the Miller mansion was filled with the sounds of the Symphony of the Stars. It was a complex piece, full of tempo changes and intricate harmonies. Michael, however, embraced the challenge with fierce determination. Emily was astonished by the boy's talent. He absorbed her instructions like a sponge, his skill growing with each passing day. Even more surprising was how she herself was becoming re-engaged in the process. The act of teaching, of sharing her music, was rekindling a passion she thought she had lost forever. The mansion staff couldn't help but notice the change. James, the butler, remarked to Mrs. Beatrice, the housekeeper, about how Mrs. Miller was venturing out of her room more often. "I heard her laughing yesterday," Beatrice said, her voice a mixture of surprise and delight. "I can't remember the last time I heard that sound." The atmosphere of the house, once heavy and oppressive, had become lighter. It was as if the music was cleansing years of sadness and resentment, note by note. The hallways, once silent, now echoed with melodies and occasional laughter. One afternoon, while working on a particularly challenging passage, Michael stopped abruptly, his hands hovering over the keys. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice serious, "why did you stop playing? Your music is so beautiful." Emily felt her heart clench. How could she explain to a child the complexities of losing not just mobility, but also the will to live? "Sometimes, Michael," she began slowly, "when we lose something important, we become afraid to love again. I lost my career, my independence, and with them I thought I had lost my music." Michael looked at her with a wisdom beyond his years. "But the music is still there," he said softly. "It never left. Maybe it was just waiting for you to be ready to hear it again." The boy's words struck Emily deeply. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but for the first time in years they weren't tears of sadness. "You're right, Michael," she whispered. "The music never left. I was the one who walked away from it." With a renewed sense of purpose, Emily guided Michael's hands back to the keys. "Now let's try again, from the beginning." As they worked on the Symphony of the Stars, Emily felt something awakening within her. It wasn't just the love of music that was resurfacing, but also a passion for teaching that she never knew she possessed. Seeing Michael's progress, the light in his eyes when he mastered a difficult passage, brought a satisfaction that rivaled the thrill of her own performances. One evening, as Emily was helping Michael with a particularly complex section, the telephone rang. James answered it, and after a brief conversation entered the music room. "Madam," he said, "it's Mr. Miller on the line." Emily took the phone, aware of Michael's curious gaze. "Hello, John," she said, her voice brighter than it had been in years. On the other end of the line, John was momentarily speechless. The background sound of the piano and the cheerful tone in Emily's voice caught him off guard. "Emily, is everything all right?" he asked, a mixture of concern and hope in his voice. "Everything's wonderful, John," Emily replied, a smile evident in her voice. "Michael and I are working on a new piece. Actually, it's an old composition of mine that I never finished." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When John spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "That's wonderful, Emily. I haven't heard you talk about music like that in so long." At that moment, Michael nailed a particularly difficult passage, and Emily couldn't help but let out a laugh of pure joy. "Oh, John, you should see. Michael is truly talented. He reminds me why I loved music so much." John felt his heart swell with his wife's words. The change in Emily was palpable. even over the phone. "I'm so happy to hear that, my love," he said softly. "I can't wait to come back and see you both in action." When the call ended, Emily turned her attention back to Michael, who was looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Is everything okay?" the boy asked. Emily smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "Everything's perfect, Michael. In fact, I think things are better than they've been in a very long time." As they returned to the piano, Emily reflected on how much her life had changed in the past few weeks. Music, which for so long had been a source of pain, was once again becoming her joy, her solace. And it was all thanks to a little boy who had entered her life so unexpectedly. The symphony of the stars was still far from finished, but Emily realized that it wasn't just the composition that was coming back to life. She herself was being reborn, note by note, chord by chord. And for the first time in years, she was eager to see and hear what the future held. The afternoon sun cast golden rays through the music room windows, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Emily and Michael had just finished another practice session of the Symphony of the Stars when the boy, his eyes shining with inspiration, made an unexpected suggestion. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice trembling slightly with excitement, "what if we created a new song together?" Emily blinked, surprised by the boldness of the proposal. Composing was something she hadn't done in years, a part of her life she had buried, along with so many other dreams after the accident. Her first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from the vulnerability that the act of creation demanded. But then she looked at Michael, saw the hope and enthusiasm in his young eyes, and something inside her gave way. "Why not?" she found herself saying, a small smile forming on her lips. Michael's face lit up as if 1,000 candles had been ignited within him. Without wasting any time, he grabbed a blank sheet of music paper and sat beside Emily, ready to begin. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of creativity. Emily was surprised by the ease with which the ideas flowed, as if a long-dammed river had finally found an outlet. Michael, in turn, contributed a freshness and spontaneity that perfectly complemented Emily's refined technique. They worked in harmony, the notes flowing from their fingers and minds as if they had a life of their own. The melody that emerged was a fascinating blend of styles. Emily's classical sophistication intertwined with Michael's more modern and daring touches. "It's like we're telling a story," Michael observed during a brief pause, his eyes shining with excitement. Emily nodded, feeling an emotion she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Yes, it's our story, the journey we've taken together." As the composition took shape, Emily realized that it was more than just notes on paper. It was a reflection of their emotional journey, the fear and sadness of the beginning, the hesitation to open up again, and finally, the joy of rediscovering a passion for music. Michael's contributions brought elements of hope and renewal, like rays of sunshine breaking through dark clouds. It was Michael who suggested they perform the new piece for John when he returned. "John, it would be the perfect surprise," the boy exclaimed, practically jumping with excitement. Emily hesitated for a moment, an old fear threatening to resurface. But Michael's enthusiasm was contagious, and she found herself agreeing to the plan. The following days were filled with secret rehearsals and final adjustments to the composition. Emily and Michael worked tirelessly, refining each note, each chord, until the music sounded exactly as they envisioned it. As the day of John's return drew closer, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation filled the mansion. The staff, though unaware of exactly what was happening, could sense the atmosphere of expectation in the air. On the eve of John's arrival, Emily found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in years: pre-performance jitters. Her hands trembled slightly as she practiced, and she questioned whether she was truly ready for this step. Michael, sensing Emily's unease, surprised her with his maturity. "Mrs. Miller," he said softly, placing his small hand over hers, "the music is already inside you. All you have to do is let it out." The boy's simple words touched Emily deeply. She smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for this small being who had brought so much light back into her life. That night, after dinner, Emily and Michael decided to play the piece one last time before bed. They sat side by side at the piano, their fingers resting gently on the keys. With a shared look of understanding, they began to play. The melody flowed from them like water from a spring, filling every corner of the mansion with its beauty. It was a song that spoke of loss and rebirth, of pain and hope, of two lonely hearts finding solace in each other. The composition began softly, hesitantly, reflecting Emily and Michael's early days together. Gradually, it gained confidence and complexity, the notes intertwining in intricate patterns that represented their growth and connection. The climax was an explosion of joy and fulfillment, Emily and Michael's hands dancing across the keys in perfect synchronicity. When the last note echoed through the room, Emily and Michael sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what they had created together. "It's perfect," Michael whispered, his eyes shining with tears of emotion. Emily nodded, unable to speak. She felt as if she had reclaimed a lost part of herself, a part she thought she had lost forever. As they prepared for bed, the mansion seemed to vibrate with the energy of the music they had played. It was as if the very walls had absorbed the melody, holding it safe for the following day. Emily lay in bed, her heart filled with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Tomorrow John would return. Tomorrow they would share their creation with him. Tomorrow, perhaps, a new chapter in their lives would begin. Across the hall, Michael also lay in bed, a contented smile on his face. He had found more than just a home in this mansion. He had found a family, a purpose, a way to honor his mother's memory through music. And so, lulled by the melody that still echoed in their minds, Emily and Michael drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the possibilities that tomorrow would bring. The mansion, once a place of silence and sadness, was now filled with music, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway announced John Miller's return to the mansion. He stepped out of the car, expecting to be greeted by the usual oppressive silence that had permeated his home for years. To his surprise, the mansion felt different, as if it had awakened from a long slumber. John entered, his footsteps echoing through the hallways. Something had changed. The air felt lighter, the shadows less deep. Paintings that had gone unnoticed for years seemed to have taken on new colors. It was as if the house itself was breathing, alive again. Intrigued, John walked towards the music room, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain. As he drew closer, a soft sound began to reach his ears. Music. Not the cold recording of a CD, but live, vibrant notes, played with passion. Reaching the doorway of the music room, John froze, the scene before him stealing his breath. Emily was seated at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys with a grace and confidence he hadn't seen in years. Beside her, Michael stood, turning the pages of the sheet music, a radiant smile illuminating his young face. Before John could announce his arrival, Emily and Michael exchanged a knowing glance and began to play. The melody that filled the room was breathtaking. It was a complex composition, rich in emotion and nuance. It began softly, hesitantly, like the first rays of sunlight after a long night. Gradually, it gained strength and confidence, the notes intertwining in intricate patterns that spoke of loss, hope, and rebirth. John stood transfixed, absorbing every note. There was something familiar about the music, something that tugged at his heartstrings in a way he couldn't explain. And then, like a lightning bolt, the realization hit him. A vivid flashback flooded his mind. He saw himself years ago, young and full of dreams, sitting beside Emily in a small cafe in Paris. They had just met, drawn to each other like magnets. Emily, with her bright eyes and nimble fingers, was playing the cafe's old wire-worn piano. John Carr's enchanted, began to hum a melody. Together, on that magical afternoon, they had composed the beginning of a song, their song. The song was never finished. With time, with the pressures of life and career, it had been forgotten, lost in the mists of memory. Until now. Tears streamed down John's face. Somehow, inexplicably, Michael had captured that long-lost melody, and together with Emily, they had brought it back to life, completing it in a way John could never have imagined. Unable to contain himself any longer, John stepped into the room, joining them at the piano. His hands found the keys, complementing the melody as if they had rehearsed together for years. Emily, hearing the new addition to the music, turned, her eyes meeting John's. In that moment, a wave of memories washed over her. The cafe in Paris, the day they met, the song they started together. Her fingers never stopped playing, but her eyes filled with tears of recognition and emotion. Michael watched, wide-eyed, sensing that he had become part of something much larger than himself. His musical intuition, his inexplicable connection to this melody, had bridged past and present in a way he could barely comprehend. The music swelled in intensity, the three souls now completely in sync. It was a symphony of emotions, love rediscovered, hope renewed, wounds being healed. When the last note echoed through the room, a reverent silence fell upon them. John was the first to speak, his voice choked with emotion. How is this possible? Emily, still stunned by the revelation, shook her head. I don't know. Michael suggested we compose something together, and it just happened. Michael, sensing the magnitude of the moment, spoke softly. I heard this melody in my dreams ever since I came here. It was like the house was singing to me. John knelt before Emily, taking her hands in his. All these years, I thought we had lost that part of us. But it was here all along, waiting to be rediscovered. Emily smiled through her tears. Not just the music, John, I was lost too. Michael, he brought me back. He brought us back. John turned to Michael, pulling the boy into a tight embrace. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for bringing music back into our home. Michael, feeling accepted and loved as never before, hugged John back fiercely. You gave me a home, he said simply. So the music was my way of saying thank you. In that moment, something shifted definitively in the Miller mansion. The silence that had reigned for so long was finally broken, not just by music, but by the sound of laughter, tears of joy, and hearts reconnecting. Emily looked at John and Michael, feeling a wave of love and gratitude so profound it almost took her breath away. The music they had created together was more than just a composition. It was a new beginning, a promise of brighter days to come. John, in turn, could hardly believe the transformation he was witnessing. His wife, so long lost in her own pain, now radiated an inner light he had feared he would never see again. And Michael, this boy who had entered their lives so unexpectedly, had become the catalyst for a healing they hadn't even known they needed. As evening descended upon the Miller mansion, the newly formed family remained in the music room, talking, laughing, and, of course, playing. The melody that had brought them together continued to echo softly, a constant promise that no matter how dark the night, music would always find a way to bring back the light. Morning sunlight streamed through the music room windows, bathing the trio in a golden glow. John, Emily, and Michael sat around the piano, still processing the events of the previous evening. The silence that hung between them was no longer oppressive, but filled with possibilities and expectations. John was the first to break the silence, his voice still thick with emotion. I can't believe it, he began, looking from Emily to Michael. The melody you two created, it's identical to the one Emily and I started composing the day we met. Emily gasped, memories flooding her mind. The cafe in Paris, she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. I had completely forgotten. How is that possible? Michael, sensing the weight of the moment, spoke softly. I didn't know. The melody just came to me. It was as if the house was singing, whispering in my dreams. John and Emily exchanged a look of astonishment. The coincidence was too great to ignore. Somehow, Michael had tapped into a precious memory that they themselves had forgotten. Perhaps, Emily said softly, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder, some songs are meant to be heard, no matter how long it takes. John nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. Michael, he said, his voice choked with emotion, you've given us back something we thought we had lost forever. Not just the music, but the connection it represents. The trio shared a moment of silence, each absorbing the profound meaning of what had transpired. The music they had created together was more than just a composition. It was a link between past and present, a bridge across the chasm of pain and silence that had formed over the years. Emily turned to the piano, her fingers caressing the keys reverently. "I feel as if I've awakened from a long sleep," she confessed. "The music, I feel it pulsing within me again." John moved closer, sitting beside her on the piano bench. Hesitantly, he placed his hands on the keys. Emily smiled, encouraging him. Together they began to play, rekindling a connection that had lain dormant for so long. Michael watched, mesmerized, feeling like a witness to something deeply intimate and beautiful. The music that flowed from the couple was different from the one he and Emily had created. It was more mature, laden with shared history and emotion. When the last note echoed through the room, John and Emily looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. John took Emily's hands in his expression serious but full of hope. "Emily," he began, "what happened here? It's a miracle. Michael brought back not just the music, but life to this house. To us." Emily nodded, tears streaming freely down her face. "I know," she whispered. He is our miracle." John took a deep breath, gathering the courage for what he was about to say next. "I've been thinking, what if we offered Michael a permanent home here with us?" Emily's face lit up with a joy that John hadn't seen in years. "Oh, you mean adoption?" John confirmed, a smile spreading across his face. "If he wants to, of course." They both turned to Michael, who had been listening to their conversation with wide eyes, filled with surprise and hope. "Michael," Emily said softly, extending her hand to the boy, "we'd like to ask you something very important. Would you like to stay with us? Permanently, as our son?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Michael looked from Emily to John, his eyes welling up with tears. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Do you really want me?" John knelt down in front of Michael, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "More than you can imagine," he said sincerely. "You've brought light back into our lives, Michael. We would be honored to have you as part of our family." Michael couldn't hold back the tears any longer. He threw himself into John's arms, sobbing with joy and relief. Emily joined the embrace, and for several minutes, the new family remained intertwined, united in a hug that sealed a promise of love and belonging. When they finally separated, all of them teary-eyed, Emily cleared her throat. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice gaining a strength that surprised even herself. "I want to play again, professionally." John looked at her with a mixture of surprise and pride. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Absolutely. Music, it's a part of who I am. I've put it aside for too long." John smiled, an idea forming in his mind. What if we did more than that? What if we turned part of the mansion into a music school? Emily's eyes widened at the suggestion. "A school?" "Yes," John continued, warming to the idea. "We could offer lessons to talented children who don't have access to quality music education. You could teach, give concerts. It would be a way to share the gift that Michael helped us rediscover." Emily felt her heart swell with emotion and possibility. "That would be wonderful," she whispered. Michael, who had been listening quietly, spoke hesitantly. "Could I help?" "With the lessons, I mean." Emily smiled, pulling the boy close. "Of course, dear, you'll be my #1 assistant." In the days that followed, the Miller mansion took on a new life. John began the adoption process, navigating the necessary paperwork with unwavering determination. Emily, in turn, began planning her return to the music world, practicing for hours on end and rediscovering the joy of creation. The idea of the music school quickly took shape. An entire wing of the mansion was dedicated to the project, with classrooms being prepared and instruments being acquired. John used his connections to spread the word, and soon they began receiving applications from eager young students. Michael watched it all with a mixture of excitement and wonder. He helped wherever he could, carrying sheet music, organizing the rooms, always with a smile on his face. In the evenings, he, Emily, and John would gather in the music room, playing together and creating new melodies. The mansion, once a place of silence and shadows, now vibrated with life and possibility. The sound of laughter and music echoed through the halls, as if the house itself was celebrating the rebirth of its inhabitants. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, Emily found Michael standing at the window of his room, gazing at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, approaching him. Michael turned, a serene smile on his face. "I'm thinking about how funny life is," he said. "A few weeks ago I had nothing. Now I have everything." Emily felt her heart swell with love. She pulled Michael into a tight embrace, kissing the top of his head. "We're the ones who have gained everything, my dear," she whispered. "You brought us back to life." As the night deepened, the Miller mansion settled into a comfortable silence, vastly different from the oppressive silence of the past. It was a silence filled with promise, with dreams about to be realized, with a new symphony about to begin. And at the heart of it all, uniting past and future, was the music, the universal language of the heart that had brought healing and hope to them all. The months flew by like notes on a musical score, and before they knew it, the day of Claire's long-awaited concert arrived. The Miller mansion buzzed with an electric energy, a palpable mixture of nervousness and excitement in the air. Emily was in her room, her fingers tracing silent patterns on the fabric of her gown, mentally rehearsing every note of the composition. Michael, now officially her adopted son, entered quietly, carrying a cup of tea. "Are you nervous, Mum?" he asked, his eyes shining with a mixture of concern and pride. Emily smiled, the term "Mom" still warming her heart every time she heard it. "A little," she admitted, "but it's a good kind of nervous, like butterflies dancing." Michael nodded, understanding perfectly. In the past months, he had become not only Emily and John's son, but also their musical partner, their anchor. Together, they had crafted the piece that would be performed tonight, a symphony that told the story of their journey of loss and rebirth. The theatre was packed, a sea of expectant faces stretching as far as the eye could see. The murmur of the crowd was like the hum of an instrument being tuned, filled with anticipation and contained emotion. Backstage, Emily took a deep breath, her hands resting lightly on the wheels of her chair. Michael stood beside her, a comforting and encouraging presence. "Remember," he said softly, "the music is already inside you. You just have to let it out." Emily smiled, remembering how those same words had come from her own mouth months ago. How much had changed since then. The moment arrived, the lights dimmed, and an expectant hush fell over the auditorium. Emily was wheeled onto the stage, the spotlight bathing her in an ethereal glow. The audience erupted in applause, the emotion of seeing Emily Miller back on stage after so many years almost tangible. Emily positioned herself at the piano, her eyes closed for a moment, centering herself. Then, with a fluid motion, her hands touched the keys, and the music began to flow. The first notes were soft, hesitant, like the first rays of sunlight after a long night. It was the sound of awakening, of fear transforming into hope. Gradually, the melody gained strength, the notes intertwining in complex patterns that spoke of challenge and determination. The audience was captivated. Emily's music was more than just a composition, it was a story, an emotional journey that resonated with every person in the room. There were moments of profound sadness, where the notes seemed to weep, echoing the pain of loss. But then, like a river finding the sea, the melody would open into moments of pure joy and celebration. At the height of the composition, something unexpected happened. Michael, dressed in a small suit, quietly walked onto the stage. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience as the boy sat beside Emily on the piano bench. Together, mother and son began to play the melody that had brought their family together. The song Michael had heard from the house, the same one Emily and John had started composing years ago. Their hands danced over the keys in perfect harmony, creating a music that spoke of love, of family, of second chances. There wasn't a dry eye in the theatre. The emotion was palpable, waves of feeling emanating from the stage and washing over everyone present. When the last note echoed through the auditorium, there was a moment of reverent silence before the audience erupted in thunderous applause and a standing ovation. Emily and Michael embraced, tears of joy streaming down their faces. John rushed onto the stage, enveloping them both in a tight hug. The Miller family was united not just by blood or adoption papers, but by something much deeper, the music that had healed their broken hearts and brought them together in a way none of them could have ever imagined. After the concert, the family returned to the Miller mansion, now transformed into a vibrant music school. The hallways, once silent, now echoed with the sounds of instruments being tuned, young voices singing, and the joyful sounds of laughter and music. Emily, John, and Michael paused at the entrance of the mansion, watching the students arrive for their evening lessons. Children of all ages and backgrounds, united by their love of music, filled the space with life and possibility. "Who would have thought," John murmured, his arm around Emily's shoulders, "that a little intruder in our car would change our lives so completely?" Emily smiled, pulling Michael closer. "It wasn't just Michael who changed us," she said softly. "We changed each other. The music, it gave us a second chance." Michael looked up at his adoptive parents, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "You gave me a home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than that, you gave me a family." Emily kissed the top of Michael's head, feeling a surge of love so powerful it almost took her breath away. "And you gave us back our music, dear, our joy." As they watched the sunset, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the Miller family felt a deep sense of peace and completeness. The mansion, once a place of silence and sorrow, now pulsed with life and possibility. John took Emily's hand, his eyes shining with love and admiration. "I'm so proud of you, my love. Your concert, it was more than a performance. It was a rebirth." Emily smiled, squeezing John's hand. "It's a new beginning for all of us," she said softly. Michael, sensing the moment, began to hum softly the melody that had brought their family together. Emily and John joined in, their voices blending in perfect harmony. And so, as night fell upon the Miller mansion, the family stood there, united by music and love. The future stretched before them, filled with promise and possibility. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but they also knew that together they could face anything. The music that had once been silenced now flowed freely, not just within the mansion, but within their hearts. It was a new symphony, a composition of life, love, and second chances, and it was the most beautiful melody any of them had ever heard.